You could look at celebrities like, I don't know, there's a couple of them, but they go around adopting babies like they're fashion accessories. And, that's not really right, I don't think, because they're more doing it to make themselves look good than about the kids themselves. I think charity is not a negative thing, but it doesn't really solve the problem because it deals with the effect rather than the cause. I don't know if you've heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, famous German Christian who stood up to Hitler during World War II, and he was actually killed by Hitler almost personally. But he said, "We are not simply to bandage the wounds of the victims beneath the wheels of injustice, but we are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself." So he's saying that we basically have to defeat the system that's producing the victims before we can really help the victims themselves. If we just keep helping them, there'll always be more victims coming out of it. So, if you have to basically attack the corporate companies that are exploiting the people instead of just helping the people who are being exploited, if that makes sense. So, what's the solution? What can we do practically? You and me, right now, we're not big world leaders. We can't shake mountains. So, I think we have to not put the cart before the horse, and we have to make the first step in our own hearts and in our own minds. We have to have our minds renewed by the Spirit. They say when you become a believer, there's a big difference between being a believer and being a convert. Because someone who's converted changes. They go from going one direction, and then they meet Jesus, and they don't keep going in that direction. They change course. That's what to be converted means. Like if you convert an old car into a new car, it's different. It's not the same thing that it was before. So a believer doesn't have to change. You can still believe in Jesus, and he cannot affect you. Like someone can say, "Oh, I believe in God," but it doesn't really mean that they're following him. So, what the world needs is converts, because they're the ones who are going to change things. There's a quote that says, "Even if the whole world believed in the resurrection, little would change until we started to practice it." Someone who believes doesn't have to act, but converts can make a change. So when someone is converted, and I know that I became a Christian when I was little, but I really didn't make the change until much later in my life, probably in my early teens. You have to redefine every part of your life. When Matthew was there fishing or whatever, and Jesus came along and said, "Hey, you want to be with me?" And, Matthew's like, "Yeah." But then you say, "Okay, sure, I believe in you, Jesus." And, Jesus keeps walking and he keeps fishing. Matthew turns and he starts to follow Jesus. Jesus says, "Follow me. Don't just keep doing what you're doing. I want you 100%. So, we have to realize that Jesus wants us 100%. And sometimes I believe that means that he wants us to get rid of the things that are holding us back. It could be possessions, like the rich young ruler. If a possession or, a money or a job or status is so important to us that we won't give it up for God, then that's a pretty, clear warning light that is what's keeping us back from following God. I have a lot of friends who are just starting their first year at university, and I didn't go this year, and they thought I was weird because I wasn't going to university. But so I'm like, "Well, what are you doing?" Talking to my friend Katie, and she's a fun girl, and I figured she'd do something cool and exciting, and she's like, "Oh, I'm going to get an orthodontist." I'm like, "Well, what's that?" And she's like, "Well, you fix people's braces and tighten them up and stuff." And I was like, "What? You want to be an orthodontist? That's like the most boring thing ever." And she's like, "Well, you make lots of money." I'm like, "Okay. Have fun with that. That'd be great." And other people want to be like a pharmacist or something. And it seems like a lot of people want to make a lot of money with doing as little as possible. So they go into business usually if they want to do that. So I thought that was kind of dumb. And what I think is that I'd rather get paid minimum wage, which is about, in Canada, $6, $7 an hour, doing something that I loved, than making millions of dollars doing something that was completely pointless and that bored me and that didn't really fulfill God's plan for my life. So it's interesting that the kids talked about Zacchaeus this morning in Sunday school, because there's an example of this kind of redirection in Zacchaeus' life when he met Jesus and he became a Christian. He changed. He didn't become homeless and start following Jesus around, but he did make a radical difference. He gave away half his stuff, and then he said, I'm going to be a good tax collector. I'm going to treat people fairly. So God was using Zacchaeus' life where he was, but he changed him. So I think I'm trying to say here that if you let God reinvent your lifestyle, it can be, you don't always have to give up your job, but you have to reevaluate it and see how you can use it to serve God. One example is my dad is an engineer, and he used to work on bridges over in Canada. And then someone inspired him and said, well, you have a talent, you can use that to help people. And so he went to Ethiopia and started digging wells and helping people set up sustainable water purification systems. And so God can use everything in our lives, but we have to be able to give it to him without reservation, which is what the rich young ruler did. He had reservations about how much he was going to give God of his life. Something that's interesting is that a lot of people in the church debate about how much of your money you should give to God, 10%, 20%, what's tithe and what's offering and whatever. But I think the real question is not how much of your money are you going to give to God, but how much of God's money are you going to keep for yourself? Because everything that we have has been given to us. It's not something that we made. God doesn't need our money. He gave it to us because he wants us to do something important with it. And he wants us to give it back to him and not have any reservations about how much God's going to do in my life or your life or whatever. So when we're converted, our worldview changes. One of my favorite authors, Shane Claiborne, said, what the world needs is people who believe so much in another world that they cannot help but begin enacting it now. And Jesus speaks about the new world, a place of no suffering and no poverty and all this kind of thing. And why does it have to be in the next world? Isn't that what Jesus wanted to bring to us now? He wants the church to be his movers and shakers, to bring peace and equality back to this world. And being a Christian isn't just about what you do on a Sunday morning and then you go back on Monday morning and do your thing. There shouldn't be a divide between your job and your spirituality, I guess. I think we over-spiritualize Christianity in the way that we say that it's only about a theological thing. It's not a practical thing. But God is practical. Jesus is practical. And he practically helped people every day of his life on earth. And because now he's in us, and we're his body, we need to be doing what he did. And Jesus did what he believed in the way that he wasn't just a missionary to the poor. He was poor. He didn't just help people. He joined them. He got down on their level. And it's been said that you don't really get in a lot of trouble for helping people. People don't, get upset at you and try to assassinate you because you're helping people. It's when you start joining in and doing radical things that people get mad at you. And that's what Jesus did. People got mad at Jesus all the time. Experience I have in my own life about this is when I lived in Africa, my parents were a little traditional about their approach. They, they weren't rich. My family's never been rich, but on an African standard, they would be considered rich, of course, because they had a car and they had a nicer house than most people did. And so my parents were wonderful people in that the way that they helped a lot of people, but at the same time, they still kept a bit of a distance.